Welcome to Peacemakers, an interview-style podcast where you'll hear and learn from world changers, ministry leaders, creatives, and many others who are influencing change and bringing peace to those around them. We're so excited that you're tuning in. Here's your host, Yonathan Moya.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you just for tuning in to another episode of Peacemakers. We are so excited to have this conversation today. We are here in South Texas and delighted to have Megan and Roland Gonzalez with us today.
Well, pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And so just to tell you a little bit about Megan and Roland, I know that we met just a few years ago, and I guess in a way where my parents' church had been a receiving ministry of the work that the ministry you lead now offers to this region. And so when I heard that there was lead directors, it's always like, oh, well, I wonder who it is. And so, but you all direct border missions in Hidalgo, Texas, right here on the U.S. and Mexico border. Border Missions was founded in 1956 by Megan's great-grandparents. And so can't wait to just hear more about that, even just personally. And so for those of you, if you're just learning about Border Missions was founded with the purpose of bringing the Word of God, and specifically the gospel, to those here in this Texas and Mexico region. And so while in the pursuit of this goal, the founders saw that there was a lot of physical needs in the Rio Grande Valley. And so they began the work to providing food, clothing, and really a lot of the needs of those people that were in need. And today, almost 70 years later, the mission continues not only to provide for people's physical needs, but also to provide them with the gospel.
Amen.
So you guys get to be a part of that.
Yep.
Yeah. So welcome. So why don't we start before we dive into that? I would love to hear just a little bit about both of you. I'd love to start just hearing about even just like your family, who makes up your family. What are the things that kind of get you excited right now? I know you all have a young family still, so tell us a little bit about that.
Here, sir. Well, born and raised here in McAllen, Texas. We got married in 2012 in April, met in April 2011, and we have an 8-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son, and a newborn 6-month-old baby boy. So we've been married for 12 years, almost 13. And he's from here in the Valley.
Yeah, born and raised pretty much South Texas, San Isidro. For the first 7-8 years of life, and then moved to McAllen, graduated from Roe. Yeah. Even knew of Megan, doing FCA in high school, but she was a couple years younger. So we knew of each other, but, life happens. We go off to college. We both had no intention of coming even back to the Valley.
Okay.
And, I was at this time studying, for the LSAT, the law school exam. And it was during that time where, a good friend of ours was getting married. She knew the bride, and I knew the groom's family. And we met at this wedding, and the rest is history. We're in the Valley still.
Yeah, we're still here, raising our family.
That's great. And so, yeah, I have little ones too. So I have 5 and almost a 2-year-old. And so I know the excitement that it is to be young parents, and then also to be wrestling in the night, right, to try to get them to bed. So,
yes, yep.
I think the Lord, it is a little bit of a challenge, and the Lord gives us different seasons for different reasons. Yeah. So I guess take us back to Megan, specifically your great-grandparents. Growing up, did you ever hear, sure you did, about border missions? Was it a topic of conversation among your family? Did you ever serve with your great-grandparents there? Just bring us into some of that insight.
Sure. Yes, very, very privileged to have that heritage. I didn't realize how fortunate I am until when I left to college and realized that not everybody comes from a line of just believers in Christ, and just having that always rooted into my life with prayer and God's big part of it. My great-grandparents, they moved down here in 1956. My great-grandfather passed away shortly after in the early 60s, so I never really got to meet him. But my great-grandmother, Sister Morgan, as they would call her, Catherine Morgan, they knew her very well. And she lived to be 102 years old. Served at the mission until she was the age of 93. But we would go as kids. My grandmother, so their youngest daughter, moved down to be closer to her when my mom was about 14. And so my mom lived on the mission for a little while, and then eventually met my dad, got married, and when she was 22 or 20, stayed here in the Valley, and I'm pretty much here because of my great-grandparents, because they started that. And so my grandma Morgan, or Grandma Catherine, we'd always call her, we'd go over there growing up for holidays throughout the summertime, or when just different, when we didn't have school. And one of the big memories I have is playing hide and seek with my cousins. Although there's a big property, and so lots of places to hide. But we'd go to also the church service, and it was all in Spanish. So I got to get a little bit of a taste of bicultural, which is really cool. And my grandma would always ask if we needed anything, no matter what. And I have an identical twin sister. Her name is Morgan, after my great-grandma. And so she was watching us one time, my sister and I. We were spending the night, and I just remember we were just 8 years old, and we were kind of bored a little bit, and I just decided to cough. So I went, right away. Like, Grandma Catherine was there. Do you need a cough drop? Do you need anything? Are you okay? Can I pray for you? So she just always had that, loved her family, loved the people, always was a woman of prayer. People would come over all throughout in our families, and just other people would come and ask her for prayer, to pray for them. Just loved the Lord. Yeah. Played the piano, played the accordion, got to hear that growing up. And so it was just really special, really special.
I think it is important to highlight when you brought up, I think sometimes for me in my own story, my parents came from northern Mexico into South Texas when I was 6 years old. So kind of by default, right? Like at 6 years old, you can't kind of choose where to live, but you know, our parents are bringing us, our parents are raising us, taking us different places. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're an adult and you grow up, and it's like, oh, this is what my family does, right? In ministry, or this is what my family does, missions. And it's interesting now as an adult to kind of think about that, I guess, a little bit, just because it's, in some ways, because we're believers, right? We see how the hand of God has been in all of that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes in the growing up, I know for me, it's like, oh, why are things happening this way? You know, but then when you're actually doing them and you realize how the Lord's working, it all makes sense. Mm-hmm. It all makes sense. So for those of you that might not know about border missions, the way that I see it, and I would love maybe you go into explain to us a little bit more. When I first learned about border missions, it's kind of like a food bank, but it's a Christian ministry, because sometimes different nonprofits or organizations that give out food, they restrict the sharing of the gospel, and that's just because maybe federal funding, things like that. But when I first learned about border missions and your work directly with churches and directly with the community, it was a different model, because really it was not only about providing for people's physical needs, but also spiritual needs. And so I think it's a powerful model, because I think not only are there a lot of physical needs, but really I think we're all longing for really the gospel. What was it about border missions that you thought was something intriguing as you started, just kind of learning about just the family legacy and in border missions within that?
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna, I guess, tie it all back to when I guess the Lord really made it clear that we were going to be the new directors in this time. Yeah. Border Missions had a fantastic legacy of great leaders. And, when we got married, Megan was already on the board of directors and board of missions, so she was actually there seeing what's going on internally, was part of that decision making. Fast forward to COVID time where, it shut a lot of places down.
Yeah.
And in that season, we were thinking, what's going to happen to board of missions? How are we going to respond? And we had amazing leaders at the time, Jerry and Alberta McKnight, who had served faithfully for about a decade.
Yeah.
But they were kind of getting up there in age, and they were thinking succession plan, especially during this time of transition.
Yeah.
And so we had, through the board, had been praying and looking for new directors for 6 months.
Yeah.
And no one really ever came. And so it was around that time that we started praying and we're asking God, is this us in this new season? We both have had full-time jobs at the time, but because of COVID, we were really flexible. Everything went to Zoom. So I was able to have Zoom meetings and, work that around the schedule so we can actually be hands-on at the mission. And that's how we really got to understand how this thing works. And you mentioned, Board of Missions kind of being a food bank, a Christian food bank. Board of Missions over the years has just developed amazing partnerships with produce companies in the area, and not only in Hidalgo, but, Far, Alamo. We sometimes even come all the way to Edinburgh. Or, we have great partners. And so these partners have been very generous with their produce and their food, and they know that it's making a difference.
Yeah.
And so I remember early on, Jerry, as he was, prepping me for this position, he was asking me, hey, Roland, do you know how to operate a forklift? Do you know how to, maneuver a pallet jack or drive a box truck? No. I remember, I had come from a meeting, so I was in, it's jacket. I was suit and tie, and people are looking at me, what are you doing? We're going to get dirty here. Like, you come to the mission, expect to work.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the MO that we received when we got there. Was, hey, you're coming here and you're part of something bigger than yourself, and come ready to work. So in that season, we had to really learn, how are we going to get this food out? Right? We can't have services.
Yeah.
And during that time, Jerry and Alberta had a great system where we were delivering curbside to people.
Yeah.
Because Hidalgo, you have 7,000 to 10,000 people in Hidalgo, majority, I would say 60, 70% below the poverty line.
Yeah.
And so we knew that this food, even though it was primarily in Hidalgo, it was hitting the right places. And we were still able, through COVID measures, to meet the needs of the pastors within our network, right? So it's not just, the local community that we were used to feeding every Thursday. That's a main part of Board of Missions. Every Thursday prior to COVID, right? Folks would come over from Reynosa or the Mexican border there in Hidalgo, and they'd walk over.
Yeah.
And, receive a hot meal that was prepared for them, and they'd go see, they'd be able to participate in a worship service, hear the gospel, and then take a bag of produce and walk back across the border, and that would sustain them for a week. And when that was closed, we had to really think about, okay, how are we going to minister to not only those people that definitely still needed it? And so we had to, be creative. How are we going to get food across the border? And there were certain times where we had to, get box trucks over and navigate, political waters. You hate to do that, but we got it done. And, but it wasn't until we ourselves actually got dirty and we're in the thick of it that we knew it's God's mission. It's something totally bigger than us. We had huge shoes to fill. But in humility, in the scriptures and throughout history, we see people that are not concerned necessarily about their abilities, but their availability.
Yeah.
And just letting God do the miraculous and let him be big and let him be famous. And you kind of step back. That's when the magic happens.
I'm in awe of, I'm just even just scaring, because I know that any ministry, I think, when you think about going and existing for almost 7 decades, right? I can only imagine the challenges that it's faced in its history. And then also you bringing up the pandemic, and we all can relate to that in different ways, but it really reminds us of just God's faithfulness, right? And the Lord providing. Are there any stories, Megan, that maybe even before, prior to you all taking on this role, that being on the board, what are some ways that you've seen God just like show up in key times where maybe, a story like this can really encourage somebody as we think about how the Lord is working and moving in places. And I say places like the border because sometimes we dismiss the work of God, or maybe we don't know that God's at work because the only thing that we hear is just from whatever's being publicized, nationally. And some of them might be maybe it's just the politics or really about the election. But really, like for us as local ministries, something that I share with our teams all the time is like God's at work here. And maybe you're not hearing about that, but that's why I get up every day. So are there any of those stories?
One of the main ones that kind of started it, my Grandma Catherine, when they moved down to Hidalgo, the land itself was given to them. Once they found out, they first came to Hidalgo with and did an open air tent preaching.
Yeah.
And then that's when the Lord called them both, or spoke to them saying, "This is where I want you." And so when they came down, and the owner of that land knew what it was going to be for, he gave it to them. And so then there was Army barracks for sale in McCook, Texas, which is about 45 minutes from where Hidalgo is.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to purchase it. And so they were able to do the down payment, and then it came time for the rest of the payment. And so her and my great-grandfather were driving to McCook to pay for it, and they had zero money in the checking account, nothing.
Yeah.
And the story is, my grandma was saying that Harold said, "I'm embarrassed. I don't want to go there. We don't have the rest of the money to pay for this." And Grandma said, "Well, God will provide." So they get to the office. Shortly after, there's a phone call, and the lady on the other line asks, "Is there a Catherine Morgan there?" "Yes, she's right here." So she gets, "Hi, do y'all still have a balance? Do you still owe for those Army barracks? I'd like to pay for them in full." And sure, that day, in that moment.
Yeah.
And so they let me talk to whoever I need to talk to. And so just things like that remind me, like, God is never late. He's always on time. He uses our ability and availability, and we just trust him. And so there's been plenty of times where Rolly and I are, a little bit stressed out. Just things, malfunctions, that an AC unit was out and needed to be completely replaced. It's $10,000 right there. Gets a call from one of his
one of my clients,
his friend, a big donor, and said, "Hey, what can I do to help?" Exact amount that we need.
Cost.
Yeah.
So that just kind of reminds me, this is something bigger. This isn't anything we started, and not even really necessarily my grandparents started. It's just being obeying the Lord and say, "God, this is yours. You started this. You're going to see it through." And when God's hand's in it, then, he continues to use it.
That's a great posture. And in many ways, it reminds me a little bit of the story of the place that we're sitting today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally, right? Like, it's in God's timing. He knows. Even I think kind of that same faithfulness of the Lord will provide, right? Like, and I often share that I get to do what I do because of those that came before me. I get to, we get to sit here in a comfortable building because, my parents prayed for a building for 30 years. I get to minister, and we get to partner with different ministries that we work with because the church has established those ministries for many, many years. And sometimes I share with my mom, like, I feel like I haven't done anything, but yet I get to live everything out. Right. And not that everything's just beautiful and rosy, but it's through the thick and thin, and it's really sometimes through those difficulties, right, where we see God show up. And I share often with people, like, that's why we do what we do, because for us, especially doing ministry here in the region that's often very polarizing, it's can't focus on the things that really don't matter, but you have to really focus and have your eyes set on what really matters. And so I'm encouraged by your story. I'm encouraged because I know that in any leadership role, especially leading an organization and communities where there is great need, we also need great faith. And we need great faith because we also we have to just fully rely on God. And the great thing is that we've seen God just show up time and time again. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. So we, one of the ways that, like I mentioned earlier, I knew about Border Missions was because my parents would go there every Friday. If they took their car, you fill up their car. If they took their truck, it was the truck, the van, the trailer. I mean, 2 trailers, whatever it was. So Border Missions gets to bless a lot of different communities because of the network of pastors and churches that you work with, both on the Texas side and also on the Mexican side. What are some of the stories and really about how God is using what you can say the resources that come from within Border Missions, and it might be in the fruits and vegetables, but then those do become into testimonies. What are some of those that maybe you guys have heard over the last few years?
Yeah. We have the amazing privilege and blessing just to really just be a part of a network of great communities. Yeah. We have amazing pastors and churches and nonprofits, that have the same type of posture of just living life with open hands there. Like everything that comes in and through Border Missions, we always act as if, it's not ours. This isn't ours. How can we be good stewards with it and make sure that we're delivering the biggest impact? And so we always want to connect with our pastors and our churches, nonprofits. Where is this food going? Can you please send us pictures, send us stories? Yeah. And there's an orphanage in Reynosa that we give to, and Casa Mami. And it's just always amazing to see pictures that they send us. Could just be rice, beans, and tomatoes that we're able to give across. Yeah. Then you see hundreds of kids that are being fed with this produce. Yeah. And there's some days, Yonathan, where I'm looking at Megan, and this was early on, and just like, babe, we're only getting like tomatoes this week. Like, I don't know how we're going to, but I mean, if that's all that we have, I mean, we're giving it out. Yeah. People are being blessed by it. Yeah. And it's one of those type of things that you're just always expecting for God to do something big, because there could be days and there are seasons of ups and downs, and there's only 10 pallets in the cooler. And our facility can hold up to 80. Yeah. And every Monday, we have about 10 that we give out to our pastors on Monday, but it's our job to fill it up. Yeah. Monday, Tuesday, so we have the rest of the week to give it out. So I think it's just a blessing that we're able to not only gather that much food, but also get it out. Yeah. And then seeing those pictures and seeing the blessings of what God's doing across the border too. Yeah.
We see it go into different colonias here on the U.S. side, and one of the pastors shared with us in the community where he has his church. There's maybe about 60 or so families that's their weekly groceries that they receive. When he comes to pick up from us, that accounts for almost 60% of their groceries for that week. And so when we think about when we get the tomatoes and bell peppers and cucumbers, I mean, that goes a long way for them. They're not having to use those limited resources to go to the grocery store to buy that. They can use that for, helping pay their bills. So that was impactful just to see, to hear that from him, that this is really helping people out with their.
Well, I mean, he made it just a few hours ago. I got a message on Facebook. They said, "Hey, is the church still passing out food?" And right now we're in the season that we're not. But I said,
Go to Border Business. Yes. Yes. Everybody gets something more than they can carry. Yeah.
You said last week you all had a big outreach, and you said everyone, I think 700.
700. There were 700 attendants, over 200 or 300 kids. Yes.
And everybody
Got a backpack.
All the kids got, everybody got a backpack with school supplies by a church out in Houston. Everybody got fed. Everybody got to take food back home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So all this work, when you're talking about just, and I would say it is abundance, and it is abundance that we get to steward. Tell me a little bit about your team. Tell me, some of the groups that come on the trips with us get to interact very personally, right, with a lot of the folks there. And I have relationships and friendship with some of them, and I think something about ministry here in South Texas is that a lot of people, they're not doing it because of the pay. Really, it is more of a calling. And more than anyone, you all know your team. So tell us a little bit about just the people you get to work with at Border Missions.
One of the longest standing would be Lucio, and I remember him as a little girl. He's been there for 20 plus years, just serving in whatever capacity he can. Always a smile on his face, always very just humble and willing to do whatever is necessary. He knows a lot about the history of the mission and has personally and seen so many people being helped.
Yeah.
And so he's a great, just a testimony of there. But Mario Ramirez is our right-hand guy, and he came on board shortly after we became directors, which literally, and this is kind of a theme throughout Border Missions, God will just send people. We're not necessarily maybe he literally, through a friend of a friend, he had lost his job during COVID, came over to do some volunteer work because he had time on his hands. We were doing curbside. We could use all the help we could get. And Roland and I were just thinking about there's no way we could hire him or afford him, hire him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
be way qualified.
Yeah.
Way overqualified.
And through just an understanding of the circumstance, I knew that they were renting at the time, and the Lord had provided for us to have kind of like a parsonage.
Yeah.
But we had our home in North McAllen, so we'd make, the trip to the mission. And it's like, well, that's available right there.
Yeah.
When we're able to provide, some housing, and then maybe, pay him a salary of some sort, to keep him here. Well, we really needed that person, because right when COVID stopped, things went back to normal for us. I couldn't be there as often or as frequent as I'd like to be.
Yeah.
And so he's really, taken that in stride, and just a great leader, humble.
Very humble.
He knows exactly what Border Missions is about, and he's just a great leader.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome. I was a part of a short tour last week there at met Carlitos, and something that he said, and the team loved this, was he was great, by the way, and it's a story. I thought it was a fun story, but I think it's just even God providing it in those ways, where a lady for some reason needed carrots, right? And he's like, well, have you prayed about it? And I think big donation of carrots.
Next day, we got a call for, hey, we have 10 pallets of carrots. Would you like to come pick it up?
And it's just, it is God.
Mm-hmm. Little details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Those little God winks.
yes. We love just hearing those stories, because even in the most simple ways, God is working. One of the things that I've been learning a lot about this whole area, Hidalgo County, even prior to COVID, I think just that 8 out of 10 families suffered food insecurity. So you guys have seen it in your own ministry with curbside on Thursdays, and just the amount of food that is needed in an area. And maybe that's something that a lot of people who don't know about the Rio Grande Valley because they're just seeing it from maybe the migration point of view. Right. But this whole area is just in a lot of need. I think back about in the 50s when your great-grandparents started border missions. And for some reason, the need has still remained here. But I think more than ever, I'm hopeful because I also see that the church is at work. And then when I say the church, is just the different ministries, the different organizations. And I kind of see Border Mission as a hub, and from there it spreads throughout a really large region. And so I want to thank you all for everything that you do. I know that it's not something light to be directing an organization, and really know that we're constantly praying for you, know that we're constantly trying to figure out ways to how do we, support more of the work that you all do. If you were to have an invitation for someone that's maybe watching, that's maybe saying, oh, I want to take my church here, I want to come and partner alongside some of the ministries, what would you tell them?
Well, that's great. Well, we appreciate you for you bringing the teams down during the summer and just throughout the year, because it gets a lot of work done quick. When there's a lot of people there to help, we can get a lot done. So that's great. Having your teams come has been instrumental. And so, yes, we accept any size group, any age. There's always just a bagging of beans and rice that we do every week. We have beans and rice every Thursday we give out to individuals, and so all that needs to be bagged. All that needs to be individually ready to go. The bags of produce, all that needs to be bagged prior to. We bag, close to 1,200 bags of produce every Wednesday to distribute out on Thursday. So there's always something to do. We have a clothing room that's always receiving donations, so that clothing then needs to be sorted and needs to be distributed. So we would love to have anybody who's willing to serve.
If you're looking for a very practical way to have just the gospel show action and really be a part of love in action, really, we invite you to consider a trip down here to South Texas. Great to get to meet some of the folks that we talked about, get to meet some of the ministries that we're networked with. And I'll tell you that in His right time, God has placed that desire to come here in your heart. And so we truly believe that. And I say that because, like both of our stories, we know that we're not here by coincidence, but we're here for such a time as this. And we know that many people in our family have prayed for this time. And so we get to steward that now. So thank you, Anne, so much for this time and this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If there was anything that stood out from this conversation, we'll link it in our show notes. If you want to learn more about Border Missions, you can find them on Facebook, find them on Instagram, or also on their website at bordermissions.org. Right? So, yep. Again, bordermissions.org. Check it out, and hope to see you down here in South Texas soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Peacemakers. Wherever you subscribe to podcasts, go ahead and hit subscribe. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and share this episode with your friends through Instagram stories on Spotify. And most importantly, don't forget to join us for our next exciting episode. Peacemakers podcast is made possible by Border Perspective. Border Perspective partners with ministry leaders and organizations to host conversations on social and biblical issues that help equip the church to love our neighbor the way God intended. You can also join Border Perspective on a service learning trip along the southern border. These trips are immersive, educational, and intentionally place you into the lives of immigrant leaders serving families on the South Texas and Mexico border. To learn more about how you can join Border Perspective's peacemaking mission, visit borderperspective.org.